Hello and a very warm welcome to you all. I'm Vikas Nangia with Focus Live Season 4. Ladies and gentlemen, we non-resident Indians often refer America as our Karma Bhumi. And we talk about India, we call it as our Matrubhumi. Now, while living in America, far away from motherland, one of our major concern is to raise our kids with the correct Indian values, making sure that they embrace our rituals very, very well. और देखिए, अगर संस्कृति की बात आती है तो परदेश में रहते हुए उसको अपनाने में, सिखाने में कई तरीके हैं जो हमारी मदद कर सकती हैं। जैसे कि हमारा खाना है, हमारी पोशाकें हैं, हमारे त्योहार हैं, हमारे भाषा है, ये बहुत सारी चीज़ें ऐसी हैं जो मददगार रहती हैं। हम बच्चों को अपने संस्कार दे सकते हैं। इन सब को एक करिकुलम में बांधती हुई कुछ ऐसी संस्थाएं भी हैं जो विशेष भूमिका निभा रही हैं। Today on the program, I have with me two wonderful ladies who in their own capacity are doing amazing work to raise awareness amongst the kids raised over here about the Indian culture, Indian values. My first guest on the program is from New York. She is Anu Sehgal. She is the founder of the Culture Tree. Culture Tree has been in existence for a while. We'll ask Anu, to give us about what's the vision, what's the mandate of this organization. And she's been doing some incredible work, to teach kids about Indian values. My second guest is here from Bangalore, India, a well-known author, Roopa Pai. Roopa is, has written the books for children. The Gita for Children is one of her best-selling books that Amazon India says that it should be one of your 100 Indian books to read in a lifetime. She has great knowledge about Gita, Vedas, Upanishads. I have these two books over here with me in my hand. The second one, the Vedas and Upanishads for Children. So incredible work at both their end. Anu, who's the founder of the Culture Tree, has organized a US tour of Roopa Pai over here. During her tour, she will be visiting several schools, colleges, prestigious institutions to talk about these books and the Indian values. Roopa and Anu, thank you so very much for joining us on Focus Live Season 4.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start the conversation with you, Anu. Talk about the existence, the vision and the mandate at the Culture Tree.
So the Culture Tree was conceptualized 7 years ago when I was frustrated with the type of language classes that were being offered for Indian American kids. I have two boys. And then also the way our culture was being represented in big institutions like museums, libraries. I just felt they were talking about India on the surface, but not really going deep. My turning point was when I went for a holy event at a museum, which I'm not going to name.
And this was in New York.
This is in New York. Mm-hmm. And the book that they were reading was a Diwali book. And that's when I was determined that something has to be done. At that time, I was working in the corporate world. But really, I started thinking, how do I change things around me? And for my kids. The Culture Tree was formed 7 years ago, informally, but soon after that, I organized Hindi classes for my kids, and I was very particular, I was very hands-on with the teacher in making sure that the curriculum was really relevant to our kids, our Indian American kids. We cannot take stuff that we have, books that we have in India and use them for our kids.
Right.
It really has to be, in their language. So that was really the point when I started working on language classes, and it was never ending. Once I scratched the surface, I had so many parents that were interested, and also institutions, I used some of my corporate skills, pitched to museums, libraries, and they really understood what I was trying to do. So the mission of the Culture Tree is twofold. One is cultural literacy, the other is language education. Cultural literacy is for children in general, children and families in general. And whether it's American families, whether it is South Asian families in America. The language education is more for our South Asian kids. And I keep saying South Asian, it's because I have languages that are Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi and Gujarati.
Right, right. Roopa, I'll reach out to you. She made a significant point that we refer New York, and as a matter of fact, entire America as a melting pot. But New York more particularly because there are people from all walks of life, of different ethnicities living over there. And she mentioned categorically the right representation. Mm-hmm. You being an author who've written so much about the books, over 25 books Roopa has written, I wanted to understand from you how significant is the representation part, where it can go wrong and what can be a win-win for parents and for the kids, especially living abroad.
Yeah, actually, I'll start by telling you that representation for kids is important even in India. Mm. Even Indian kids, when I was growing up, there wasn't enough representation of my kind of life or my kind of childhood in the English books that were available.
I saw American representation over there
much better,
more prominent and stronger,
much better
than the Indian itself.
When I was growing up, British representation was very strong.
So true.
Yeah, with Enid Blyton books. And all we had as children growing up in the 80s and 70s was Amar Chitra Katha,
right,
which taught us amazing stories of our mythology. I'm a huge fan, just like everybody else of my generation. But none of those books represented me, my reality as a child of the 70s and 80s in India.
Right.
So I grew up feeling that because I read so much Enid Blyton and because she wrote over 700 books and she was such a master storyteller, I ended up growing up thinking that British children had very cool childhoods, and my childhood sucked somehow because it didn't look like those childhoods at all. Because British childhoods, apparently, according to Enid Blyton, had no adults involved. The children were doing exactly what they wanted.
Right.
They were catching criminals, they were having adventures, they were having club meetings, where they only hung out with people their own age and decided agendas. And my childhood in India was just about adults. Many, many adults, not just my parents, not just my grandparents, but uncles and aunts who were only very tenuously related to me, but somehow had the right to tell me what to do and how to dress and take care of me and nurture me. So it took me a while before I came across an Indian magazine called Target, which was a children's magazine, one of the best, I think, that India has ever brought out, where there were stories written by Indian authors about children like me living my kind of life in the cities. But all those children somehow seem to be having a marvelous time.
Right.
And I thought to myself, oh my God, does that mean my childhood is actually fun?
Right.
Somebody had to hold up a mirror to me to show me that my childhood was wonderful.
Right.
And that's when I think I realized, without thinking of them or without articulating them in those words, I realized the importance of representation. That this is a new word, right? We didn't think of it growing up, but that was when I decided. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I said I want to be a writer of Indian stories for Indian children, so that no other generation...
Bring some value to your writing, basically.
Yeah, and no other generation should grow up feeling life is elsewhere.
Right.
They should appreciate what they have and then meet people of other cultures on an equal footing, not feeling inferior in any way. So that was my intent.
That's wonderful. I'm already getting some good vibes from both of you. So Anu, very beautifully, Roopa, very articulately, should I say, that she expressed that why she wanted to write and how important is, representation. Let me ask you, what was your first impression of how Indian values or Indian references were brought into the American mainstream? What was your first impression that really prompted you or triggered you that, I'm going to go a little deep? Representation, I understand that's a word at large, but if you were to go deep, I'm sure there was much more to it. Right. I want to understand that part from you and the efforts during the last 7 years you've put in year by year, project after project. Walk us through that also.
Yeah, so I think there are two different answers, and it depends on whether you're talking about South Asians or whether you're talking about Americans in general. I think the value system, I am a parent and I struggle with it as well.
Right.
And as an educator...
And I'm sure many parents will resonate with your situation. New York mein to Indians bahut sare hai, but think about people who are living in Denver, Colorado, or where the Indians are living. They're a handful of families, so please go ahead.
Right. And as an educator, I try to bring in the value system. Even simple example is in our language class. we tell the kids, okay, you can call the teacher Anu ji, you know, and then of course in Hindi, the way you say a sentence tells you whether you're talking to an elderly person or someone that is your age. So that is one value aspect. And again, you know, I bring in all these celebrations, you know, Gandhiji's birthday, which goes back to our value system. And it's the way you tell stories. You highlight things that, from value standpoint, are critical for our kids to know.
Right.
The other part is, you know, Americans in general. They don't have the concept. They don't understand what we are saying. But again, it's taking stories that they will really understand well, and then telling those stories in a very relevant way to them, making comparisons. When I'm explaining a festival of Diwali, I typically tell, and I'm talking to kids that are preschool, elementary school kids.
Right.
I tell them Diwali is like 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, all in one.
Right.
And then they totally get it, that, you know, there are fireworks, there is family, there is, you know, celebration,
victory of good over evil.
Yeah. Good over evil. So it's really, I think the key thing is pushing the envelope with our kids. We think our kids cannot do it, but they can. And then also being very careful about what stories we are telling.
Right.
And that's where the curation process is very critical.
That's why I opened up by saying the correct Indian values. You see, there could be many interpretations, many ways, but the correct one is something very, very important. Yeah. And here I also want to ask you, you know, and Roopa, you can jump in and give your opinion and take as well. You know, you're well traveled and you've participated in several. She's a phenomenal TEDx speaker. You have to check out her video. You know, the talk that she's given on Gita. You know, specifically connecting it with the younger generation. So feel free to jump in any part of the conversation. Here, I also want to understand from you. You see, sometimes when we are talking about these values, people try and bind them with a religion as well. And very, very less number of people understand the difference between a religion and a dharma. You see, there are two different things over here. They make them feel that as if, you know, following a religion is your dharma. By the way, they're two separate things. Yeah. So making those, you know, making those things or the facts clear to the younger generation is also very, very important. Because when we call America as a melting pot, we want to make sure that every other religion is respected the way it should be, right? Please go ahead, and Roopa, you can add on to it as well.
Yeah, and Vikas, I'll go back to our conversation we had yesterday. You know, I come from a very secular, you know, family. As I mentioned, my father was Hindu, my mother is Muslim, and that's the mindset I grew up with. I strip out the religious aspect from the programs that we are doing, but at the same time, you know, when we are talking about Gita, we are talking about it as a way of life and all the life lessons. We are removing the religious aspect. That's when it starts getting a little sticky, I would say. But I think that's the way to do it.
Roopa, you'd like to add something to that?
Yeah, well, the Gita for Children came out in 2015. I hadn't had myself much of an engagement with the Bhagavad Gita until I started researching for the book. And I myself I had a lot of trepidation about whether it would be very religious, patriarchal, casteist, racist in some way. And I was clear that if I found that it was, then I would not whitewash it for children. I would tell them what it was, or I would not pick up that enterprise at all, because I didn't want to be someone who, as a children's author, especially speaking to an impressionable audience, put even the tiniest seed of any kind of bias in their heads. And to my great surprise and my joy, I found that I did not need to strip religion from it, because it's a very secular text.
Right.
It's a very secular text. I have begun to call it the oldest self-help book in the world, because everything it says is not limited to a particular geography, or it doesn't matter which gods you worship, it does not matter what the color of your skin is, it doesn't matter what culture you come from, or indeed in which age you have lived. These are eternal truths.
On the other side of the break, I'm going to really talk about the relevance, how you, develop the interest of children in Gita. and keeping this ancient text, mythology in perspective, bringing in and connecting with the modern values. How do you do that? I'm going to ask you all that. We're going to have in-depth conversation on the other side of the break. But over here, before I really go to the break, I do get some sense over here that why did you organize a US store for Roopa? I'm sure, that's where you want to connect the dots and want to make sure that the kids, get the right and the correct information. But talk about this whole US store. What areas are on the agenda? What all institutions, Roopa, you plan to visit? And I understand yesterday you had interaction with some folks at a yoga institution as well, and those were not children; they were adults. That's what you told me prior to the conversation. What is it the folks in the West are expecting from Roopa, and what was your vision of having Roopa store in America? Let's start with Anu first, and Roopa, I'll reach out to you.
So the starting point for me was 5 years ago. I was looking for the Gita for my boys, and I just was not finding anything that spoke to me. And then I came across Roopa's book, which was not on Amazon, and I had to really look for it. And I mentioned to you there was a 6-month wait period in getting the book. And once I read it with my two boys, at that time they were 9 and 6, they were transformed. My older one ended up making this family tree of Mahabharata, of the parties and all the and it's much more complicated than I thought about it, even as an adult. And that was the first time I understood Gita the way I understood it. Growing up in India, I feel I didn't get the same grasp of the Gita, watching all these, shows and then reading some of the stories.
You learned it from the television screen.
Exactly. So that was basically the point when I got obsessed. I typically, my passion projects are obsessions, and I was like, I have to get Roopa to somehow, first of all, teach my own kids. But it always starts with my own boys.
Right.
And I started thinking, how do we get Roopa to America? So we did have a literary festival in 2019, where we flew Roopa to talk for 1 hour about life lessons from ancient India. And it was a room full of people from different age groups. There were kids, there were older folks, there were adults. And when she spoke for 1 hour, there was a pin drop silence. Like, people were just listening to her. And, that's when I said, we cannot stop our journey here. So we've been doing summer camps with Roopa, and they're for middle school, high school students. And finally, this is happening. I was like telling Roopa, we have to get you here. So at this point, we are working with some schools in New York City. Again, it's targeted to middle school, high school students. But some schools are also engaging her to talk to the teachers. We also have a session at Asia Society with the Council General has supported. And then we are talking to some other universities, Princeton and Yale, to see how we can keep engaging with Roopa in the future.
That's awesome. Roopa, how excited are you about this US store and, interacting with the, kids of Indian origin, but raised in America? How excited are you about that?
So I have some exposure to it because of Anu's summer camps. Over Zoom, we've done a few over the COVID years, which was actually, in that sense, it was an advantage that everyone was ready to tune into Zoom and have these virtual sessions.
Right.
So what I have learned now in 7 years of touring India, all kinds of cities, tier 2 cities, all kinds of forums, and then in the last 2 years speaking to American kids, and starting with 2019, what I have learned is that it is true that some questions are existential. human beings need them answered. It touches a chord when you talk about
Especially
those truths.
This generation needs answers for all their
For
questions.
many things,
Yeah.
because they are confused, they are in despair, they are very much a generation of Arjunas.
Right.
I mean, I don't think any generation has not been a generation of Arjunas. It's just, it manifests differently in each generation. But it feels like right now, post-COVID, and with the climate crisis looming and wars, it feels to young people today that there is no future.
Right.
There is no hope. So they are feeling very hopeless. And at such a time, to bring to them the ancient texts, to make them feel that, you know, the problems have been the same.
Right.
You are not unique in your problems, that these problems have beset humanity from the very beginning, and luckily for you, there are answers.
Right. I'd like you to expand on that on the other side of the break.
Yeah.
As I said, you know, on the other side, I want you to make us understand that how do you connect the ancient texts, mythology, you know, with the modern times, especially from the kids' perspective. So we'll talk about that on the other side. Viewers, we'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned and keep watching Focus Live Season 4. Welcome back. You're watching Focus Live Season 4. I'm Vikas Nangia. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm in conversation with Anu Sehgal, the founder of the Culture Tree, and with the award-winning author, Roopa Pai. Once again, welcome to the program, ladies. So, Roopa, I'll just get on to where we left the conversation earlier. You know, make me understand that how do you explain kids Gita, Vedas, Upanishads, you know, all that is, you know, heavy words for me, and to simplify them and connect that with the modern times, the times that we're living in, how do you make it as, you know, a comfort zone for them?
So, let's start with the Gita itself. The Gita is a distillation of the wisdom of the Upanishads. So when we talk about the Gita, we're really, in fact, talking about the Upanishads, which are part of the Vedas. So they're all very much connected. Now, the Gita is set in a battlefield, right? So there is I mean, most of you who are watching this, if you're South Asians, Indians, you probably know the whole context. So there is a great war about to begin, the war of Kurukshetra. The Kauravas are on one side of the field, who are, you know, non-virtuous, adharma. They represent adharma. They have they've made a lot of mistakes. They have made a lot of bad choices, and they are the ones that need to be put down if dharma has to rule. And on the other side are the Pandavas, who are more righteous, who always try at least to do the right thing. So the war is between these two, and in the middle of it is the Pandava prince Arjuna, the greatest archer in the world, and his best friend Krishna. So we often don't think of them as best friends. We think of them as having a mentor-mentee relationship or a god and devotee relationship, but that's not true. So they were, at their core, they were actually very good friends who had spent a lot of time together getting to know each other before the war began. And when the choice came for Krishna to which side to pick, he was being fair, and he said he offered to both the sides, because he says both have an equal claim on me. He offered them, one of you can have my mighty army, and one of you can have me, but I will not pick up a weapon in battle. And Duryodhana, who is the oldest of the Kauravas, who was in opposition with the Pandavas, he immediately picked the army. He said, I would like your army. And before Arjuna could speak, and then Krishna said, okay, Arjuna, then you have to just deal with me. You know, it's just me for you. And Arjuna said, but why would I want your army when I'm an army myself? I can hold off an entire army on my own. You're my best friend. I want you on my side. I don't care whether you pick up a weapon or not. And I don't want you wandering around the battlefield. I want you in my chariot, by my side, all the time. So the war opens with, the war is about to begin. Wars begin at sunrise. The conch has already been blown. The sun is about to rise. And suddenly, Arjuna decides, hey, Krishna, will you take me to the center of the battlefield? And Krishna says, why do we have to do it now? You know, the war is starting in a minute. And he says, no, please do that, because I want to lock eyes with all the guys on the other side. I want to let them know their angel of doom is coming to get them. They will not be standing by evening. And Krishna says, okay, fine. If you want to do this, let's do this. They go to the center of the battlefield. Arjuna locks eyes with everybody in the front row. And who are the people in the front row? The commanders of the army, including Bhishma, his grandfather, including Drona, his teacher, including all his cousins, his uncles, his nephews. And suddenly, the greatest warrior in the world, has the most unprecedented thing happens. He has a nervous breakdown. And he says his body language is screaming despair. He collapses to the floor of the chariot. He tells Krishna, I cannot do this. There is nothing more wrong than this. How can I kill my people? Right? So, and then the Bhagavad Gita is the conversation. Krishna just doesn't say, okay, you've come to your senses, let's go, Arjuna. He gives him the lecture of his life. And that lecture or that conversation we call the Bhagavad Gita. And it's so full of wisdom. Now, I tell kids, why would a conversation that happened so many thousands of years ago on a battlefield so far away from where you live, why, and in which a friend is telling another friend, you stand up and kill your family, that's the right thing to do, why would it be relevant to your life? I mean, hopefully you'll never be in that position where you're asked to stand up and kill your family. And then I tell them that that's because Kurukshetra is not just a faraway field in Haryana. Kurukshetra is the world. Kurukshetra is in our minds. Kurukshetra is in our hearts. Every day, every decision we make, we are actually doing battle. Between two decisions, two possible or 3 or 5 or 10 choices that we could possibly make. And we are picking what the right thing to do is. And if we have a Krishna by our side, and the best part is we all have our own inner Krishna. And if we can shut out the Pandavas, shut out the Kauravas that are screaming inside of us, because there are no Pandavas and Kauravas outside of us, they're all inside of us. If we can shut those voices, only then will we hear the still small voice of our Krishna speak to us, and we will be empowered to make the right decisions. So when you think of the Gita as an instructive book for the game of life, for the battle of life, then you instantly see how relevant it is to every child, man, woman, whoever they are, wherever they live. So.
You are, what I'm impressed with is that the way Roopa encapsulated Bhagavad Gita, for many it has taken years to understand it. She just summarized it so quickly, so swiftly, seamlessly. And I was totally captivated when she was talking about it. And I'm sure that's the experience for the children as well when they're listening to her. So what I feel is that you're a smart orator as well. And I also feel that you're a great storyteller. A lot of authors that I interact with, they're great at writing, but to express it well and impress people around, that's somewhere that gap is there. I think with you, it goes seamlessly.
Thank you.
So that's
That's exactly what when I saw her TED Talk or when I saw her speak, that's exactly the feeling I have, that she is such an amazing orator and she talks our language, like we understand what she is saying. The other thing that you didn't mention was during our camp, when we are going through all the scenarios, all the characters, she compares them to, Greek mythology, which our kids are very familiar with. So she does make those comparisons
as well,
and also laying the groundwork, like telling them what the Indus Valley civilization is or was. And then also
the Vedic people.
The Vedic people framing like the whole talk
story
about Hinduism. Hindus. I just feel she just says it in a very understandable.
So make me understand, this time around the tour that you have, many of the students who were part of the summer camp, of course, they'll be excited to meet you in person, but there'll be many, many new individuals as well. So is this going to be more like a sneak peek for them, or do you plan to keep it as a continuing education? Because it's not just that it will end over here. There's so much to talk, there's so much to explore.
Never ending.
It's an unending, It's a never ending, it has to be in continuity rather, I would say. So make me understand that how do you plan to pan this, whole tour? And also, is it like a ticketed event kind of a thing where each student or the participant would be coming to attend your session? Is it like a ticketed thing, or what's the layout like?
The layout for
and where people can register? Is it the respective schools will do it, or is it the Culture Tree website where people can go and register? Walk me through the whole process.
I have been working with schools, especially in New York City area, that. So I targeted first schools that have got an over-index of, Indian students, because I felt it would be an easier sell for me. But the schools have basically gone with, sessions with Roopa, whether it is, some of them was talking about religious studies. Some of them said about that they want to do it through library. And the collegiate session that we'll have with, it's all the middle school students, all the high school students will meet separately. So when, just taking the example of collegiate school, when we had our Zoom call, and I was talking to my contacts there about Roopa for the past 1 year.
Sure.
And I said, just wait till you have the Zoom call with Roopa. And once they had it, they were like, you know, Roopa, we want you to talk to our teachers also, our parents also.
Interesting.
So it's basically school by school that we are going with our school tour. They come and sign up for whatever the way they want to factor in or bring in Roopa. And then the second part of your question, yes, it is just a sneak peek, because I keep telling Roopa, you're an Indian treasure that needs to be discovered and shared with everyone. So my hope is that once parents or teachers see Roopa and hear her talk about these amazing ancient texts, they will basically say, okay, we want to have virtual sessions or we want to fly her.
Roopa, you very aptly also mentioned that, you know, you make kids understand that it's not about, you know, the Kurukshetra, you know, the conversation between Krishna and Arjun. The world is a battlefield. You know, there are moments when you would have to take tough decisions, and sometimes decisions which are practical than emotional decisions, you know. So, and Bhagavad Gita really teaches you all that. Today, I also see that Bhagavad Gita is taught in the corporate world as well. And, you know, the folks like to take some education out of it. You know, they want their staff to know how to take the tough decisions and make it as a win-win for the company. Talk about, you know, Gita being taught today in corporate world.
The wonder of the Gita is that it's relevant and applicable to any situation. That's why I call it the oldest self-help book in the world. So I tell kids sometimes when I'm in a more jolly mood that, you know, you can go to a shelf of self-help books in a bookstore. Any title that you can think of that your parents are reading, come on, tell me. And I say that the answer, that could be an alternative title for the Bhagavad Gita. It could encompass all of this. And because it is set in a battlefield, there are many, many situations which are battlefields. Everyday life is a battlefield, corporate life is a battlefield, going to school and being with your peers and trying to be cool among your peers, that is a battlefield. Do you want to be popular? Do you want to be right? You know, decisions that young people can make are hugely impactful, particularly in the age of social media. And they stay there online forever. So when you have made some unwise decisions, how do you get over the regret of them? How do you make sure you make less unwise decisions, more mindful decisions? All those things are in the Gita. So leadership, friendship. So if you think of it as a...
Even if relationship matters, you know,
absolutely.
Things,
Completely. And as you said, it's about being pragmatic and being true to dharma than being confused by emotions.
Right.
So to develop a certain dispassion, keep the emotions away. If your decision, your action is being prompted by an emotion, then it's probably not going to be right action. Yeah. So stop, pause.
The more I'm talking to both of you, I'm sure our viewers would also be interested to know a bit about your backgrounds. You know, I mean, you said you come from a corporate world, and I want to understand from you, Roopa, that how did the writing happen to you, and that too, you know, such a niche subject, you know, such a niche area. You could have picked anything else, but focusing on children and sharing the ancient wisdom with them, that's a tough one, you know, because there's so much, this tough one because there's so much written already.
Right.
And how, you know, the person reading as me as a parent would be concerned that, yaar, ye sahi hai ya ye sahi hai? Kisko padho?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's start with Anu first. Let's understand her corporate background. And you know the entire journey from corporate world to starting the culture tree, and then a bit about your background, Roopa.
So my background starts back in India. I grew up in North India in a small town called Meerut, as I mentioned, in a very, very tolerant household. And that really, you will see that come through in the way we run our programs, the way we do things, whether it's through our language classes or not. And I moved to the US for my education, my higher education. I've worked in finance and then got my MBA, worked in brand management and marketing. And I was very happy doing what I was doing until I had my own kids. And once I had my own kids, I started interacting with Indian culture in a completely different way. In a way that I hadn't even thought of I would ever interact. And it became just such an important aspect that if this is how India is represented, A, will my kids like it? And then B, will my kids understand it? So those were the, prompts for me to really think through how do I make things different.
Right.
And I'd also reached a point in my career when I basically said I want to be my own boss. But I just, it was basically the mission that was driving me to do something different and do something different for our kids and kids in general.
Yeah. Roopa, a bit about your background.
So I graduated with a computer engineering degree.
What?
Yeah, which
From
is
computer engineering. Well, you're Bangalore based. I'm not surprised. It's
Exactly.
Silicon Valley
Yeah.
for India. So.
So in Bangalore in the 80s, it was in the late 80s, it was like, if you are bright academically, you go into engineering or medicine, that's all.
Right.
There were two choices. Any middle-class South Indian family would say, professional background, would say these two things and my mom was very keen, I want my daughters to have a professional degree so they will always be able to fend for themselves financially, never dependent on anyone else. And I had always wanted to write. So for me, engineering was a detour. It was not that writing was a detour from engineering. Engineering was a
You're
detour.
reminding me of Three Idiots movie.
Oh, completely. I think Bangalore is full of engineers who use their engineering 4 years as a way to figure out what they really wanted to do in life,
Right.
and then went ahead and did that. So I'm one of those Bangalore engineers. I always knew I wanted to write. And like you were saying, why did I want to write for children and why did I take up these kind of subjects? Again, if you had this book, The Gita for Children came out in 2015. If anyone had told me in 2013, when I had just finished writing a book on popular science and a series for children, a fantasy adventure series, India's first actually, called Taranauts. I had just finished those, and if you had told me in 2013 that your next book will be on the Bhagavad Gita for children, I would have laughed uproariously because I had nothing to do with the Gita. It was not on my radar at all. In fact, my editor somehow, my editor at Hachette India, which published the books, her name is Vatsala, and she somehow decided that I should write the Bhagavad Gita for children and would not let me go. 6 months I resisted staunchly. I said, I know nothing about it. It's meant for old people. I don't want to be this uncool children's writer who writes about those kinds of topics. I want to write about adventure and fantasy and science and medicine, which I have also, about economics and life skills, all kinds of exciting things. But I mean, the Gita really, and for some reason she would not let go. And she said, why don't you, if you say you've never read the original, I don't know Sanskrit also, I have only learned during COVID a little bit. So she said, sit with the translations, figure out, and if you tell me...
That was your research.
Yeah, if you tell me at the end of it that, take a month, give yourself the time and do a sincere attempt to understand the Gita. And if you tell me at the end of it, after your sincere attempt, that it's not meant for children and I will not do it, then I will let you go. And because by the time I had read the second chapter, when she called me back a month later hesitantly saying, do you think... I had turned 180 degrees and I'm like, I have no idea why nobody made me read this book before. And it's meant children will have a much better life if they have these principles in them. And I think we have done the Gita a disservice by keeping it on a very high pedestal and not making it accessible.
Right.
And I said, I don't want to do this. How I did it was I did not want to do it shloka by shloka. Most versions of the Gita will tell you the meaning shloka by shloka. I said, this is a book for children. I have to storify it and then bring in the shlokas, just a little bit, just to never let them forget that they are reading an ancient text.
Right.
Only for that reason. But otherwise, let's keep the tone conversational.
Right.
Let's keep it story-like.
That's the best way to approach, so that it's for the readers, young readers, it's like there is a connectivity there. They find themselves resonating with those kind of situations, and it's as if the book is talking to them. I think that's the best thing.
Right.
We'll take another short break over here. On the other side of the break, I'll resume my conversation with Roopa and Anu. Stay tuned and keep watching Focus Live Season 4. Roopa and Anu, thank you once again for joining us in our last segment of our conversation, and I'm looking forward to this US tour of Roopa and I think Anu, a great vision there to put something together like this, and especially at the the school, university level, at the institutional level. I think that's a great way to give it a good start. Roopa, the last question that I had for you when I was asking you, how did writing happen to you? And, you were giving us the information. As part of that question, I also asked that there's so much written already. The viewers often get confused that what should I read? Some also come from, prestigious institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to take their name, but people would understand that. But my question is, from the reader's point of view, how should they pick the book? And let's say if they pick a book and they start reading, where is it that they should, maybe after reading maybe the first chapter, they should stop and analyze it. Am I reading the right thing, or should I pick another one on the same subject? You know what I'm saying? It could be some confusion for the students. Please go ahead.
So one of the reasons I finally ended up writing this book was, one of it was, of course, that I was so utterly charmed by it and its philosophy that I wanted to share it with everyone. But I also felt it was important to put my version of the Gita out there, how I understood it, so that, an accessible version, I mean, so that people who had stayed away from it, fearing it, being intimidated by it, would engage with it, and then be able to hold their own in conversations with other people who said, do you know what the Gita says? It says this. And they should be able to counter it with, that's not what I understand. I have read the Gita as well, and I think this is what it says. So I wanted to empower children to be able to say that. The other thing is, what was your question? How do you pick, right?
Pick the right one for yourself?
Yeah. So the thing is, the wonderful thing again about the Gita and other ancient Indian texts is that they reveal themselves to you depending on who you are. So there is no the version of the Gita. So don't go searching for the version. There is only your version, my version, his version, her version. So I would recommend that you read a variety of different versions of the Gita. Don't stick to any one. And while you do, whichever resonates with you the most, make it yours. And definitely feel free to make notes and say, this part I don't agree with, this part I think that Gita explains it better. And make your own.
Maybe take up as part of a questionnaire. And ask to
and
such as you.
Make it your own. I think all of us come with different emotional baggage from different lives. At least that's what we believe in India, that we have lived many lives. Our souls are old souls. You may be in a 10-year-old body, but your soul is very old. So you'll be able to pick up different things based on your own self, and whatever feels like the right thing to you, keep it. There is enough wisdom in it to feed everyone.
So true, so true. Slowly, gradually, we're coming towards the end of this conversation. Anu, you explained the mandate, the vision, the desire, the quest, so many words that I can say with what you started Culture Tree. But what are you aiming in years to come? Where do you see it in, let's say, another 3 to 5 or 7, 10 years? What's the goal?
The goal is to keep expanding. Our language classes are national, but I want the cultural programs to also become national. Things like curating books that are relevant and representing India in the right way is one of my key focus areas at New York Public Library. But I want to do the same thing at various libraries and even schools. So the goal is that we expand seamlessly. We have put together 4 different puppet shows also that represent, because it's again talking in the language that kids understand.
Right.
So things like that are very easy for us to sell and for kids to grasp, or even adults to grasp. And there is just a lot of things, like even in the simple thing like a puppet show, there is storytelling, there is music, there is like so many
I
different
think
things
there
that
are,
we can.
as you're saying, puppet show gives me a feeling that there are various other creative ways. There could be,
So many.
there's music, dance, ballet. There's so much more at the creative side that you can do. And there are other organizations doing already, but you have to have your own creative side to it. So I
Right.
think puppet show is a great way of storytelling
It's
as well.
it opens
very unique,
doors,
yeah.
and it opens doors. So the goal is to keep expanding. I think the other thing is just getting into more products. That is one thing that I'm going to start focusing on because
Okay.
I feel, especially from language literacy, I think there's a lot going on in America right now, but from language education standpoint, we are at a very particular disadvantage, the South Asian languages, although there are so many of us. So no matter how much we do, it's going to be insufficient.
Right.
So I think that's the other thing that I'm trying to focus on. How do I elevate, the educational aspect as well as the language aspect?
Interesting. All right, as we wrap up this conversation, Roopa, this time around, I want to get closing remarks from you. Anything in particular that you'd like to tell our viewers who are watching this across North America?
Let me see. Yeah, I think it's the same. Maybe I'll talk to you about Namaste then, because this is something I found only in the last couple of years while I was learning Sanskrit. So we all do it so naturally, Namaste, but do we understand the meaning of it? And what I discovered while learning Sanskrit was that Sanskrit is a language based on sound, not based on writing. In fact, we've adopted the Devanagari script to write it, but Sanskrit itself did not come with a written script because it was never meant to be written. It was only meant to be heard, orally transmitted, because every sound carries meaning in it. So if you look at Namaste, very literally, it is Te Namaha, Namaha Te, which means I bow to you.
Right.
But the root sound of Namaste is Nam, which means to bend. So while we might do the physical thing of bending, what we need to understand is when we say bend, we mean to be flexible. So when we say Namaste, we are saying, I'm becoming flexible, I'm opening myself to receive you. I'm not standing here like one rigid person. While my body is bending, my mind is ramrod straight and saying what I know is right, and I reject you because you are the other, because you hold a different opinion, or the color of your skin is different, or you worship a different god, or you eat something that I don't eat, so I don't accept you. No, when you say Namaste, you are becoming flexible to receive the other person, whatever their ideology is, whatever their ideas are, because, and this is the main thing, in the Upanishads, the God or the cosmic energy is described as Brahman. And Brah just means vast and expansive. And only if we open ourselves up to other people's opinions and ideas can we become vast. And when we become vast, we become Brahman. And that's what the Upanishad says. One of the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads, the great pronouncements, is Aham Brahmasmi.
Correct.
I am Brahman, which means I am vast. I am so vast that I can embrace every other opinion and ideology within me, and we can all have a harmonious world.
Great way of explaining Namaste and Aham Brahmasmi. Awesome. Anu, we live in a very modern, multicultural environment over here in America. I think initiatives like this are much required so that, our children stay connected with our roots. So all the very best to you for this endeavor. Any closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I would say everyone should do is just open up and share all that you know about the Indian culture, and I'm assuming, or whichever culture you come from, with people around you. Everyone can contribute, everyone can make a difference, and spread as much knowledge as possible.
Because every point,
as much as you can spread as a tree.
Exactly.
Yes, and every point of view, every truth is valid.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
See, that's
Absolutely.
connected.
Yeah. Right.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's episode of Focus Live. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and insight. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of tonight's episode of Focus Live. Until next episode, stay focused, stay blessed. Good night.